Close your eyes, take a slow breath in, and let it go. Somewhere in the dark of 1856, in a small village in what is now Serbia, a storm was breaking over the mountains. Lightning cracked the sky. Thunder rolled through the valley. And in a stone house at the edge of a dirt road, a woman named Georgina held her newborn son close and whispered his name for the first time. Nikola. She could not have known, no one could have known, that this child, born in the middle of a thunderstorm, would one day tame lightning itself. Welcome to the quiet Pantheon. Tonight we sit together in the dark, and we remember a man who changed the world so completely that you cannot move through a single day of modern life without touching his work. The lights above you, the device in your hand, the electricity that hums quietly through the walls of the room where you are resting right now. All of it traces back, in some way, to Nikola Tesla. Let your body sink a little deeper into where you are resting. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nowhere you need to be. Just listen, and let the story begin. Part 1. The Village and the Storm. Nikola Tesla was born on the 10th of July 1856 in a small village called Smiljan, a quiet place nestled in the mountains of what was then the Austrian Empire, in a region known as the military frontier. Smiljan was the kind of village where everyone knew everyone, where the church bells told you the time, where the smell of pine and river water carried through the open windows in summer, and snow buried the roads deep enough to silence the world entirely in winter. His father, Nikola Tesla, was an Orthodox priest, a serious, learned man who filled the house with books and believed strongly in education, in discipline, and in the importance of a well-trained mind. Milutin could recite long passages of poetry from memory. He composed his own verse. He believed that the mind was a muscle, and that it must be exercised every day without fail. His mother, Georgina, known to everyone as Duka, was perhaps the most remarkable person in young Nikola's life, though history has not always given her the credit she deserves. She was the daughter of a priest, and she could not read. But she had a memory that astonished everyone around her. She could recite entire epic poems, thousands of lines, after hearing them only once. She invented household tools to make the work of the farm easier. She had nimble, tireless hands, and a mind that was always turning, always finding a better way to do things. Nikola, it seems, inherited something from both of them. He was the fourth of 5 children. Above him were 3 sisters, Milka, Angelina, and Marika. And above them all, beloved and admired by the whole family, was his older brother Dane. Dane was extraordinary, brilliant, charming, handsome, the kind of child who seemed to light up a room simply by walking into it. His father adored him. The whole village spoke of Dane Tesla as someone destined for great things. Nikola worshipped his brother, and then, when Nikola was 5 years old, Dane died. The exact circumstances have been debated. Some say Dane fell from a horse, some say the horse startled and Dane was thrown. Some accounts suggest that Nikola himself may have been present, that something he did or did not do may have played a role in the accident. We do not know for certain. What we do know is that Dane's death cast a long shadow over the Tesla household, and over young Nikola in particular. He grew up in the shadow of a brilliant older brother who was gone, and in a home where grief made his father turn even more of his hopes toward his surviving son. The weight of that was not a small thing to carry. Let your breathing slow a little more, in and out. The mountains of Smiljan, the sound of pine trees in the wind, the distant rumble of a summer storm. From early childhood, Nikola showed signs of an unusual mind. He had visions, not dreams exactly, but waking flashes of light that appeared before his eyes. Sometimes they were accompanied by images, scenes from places he had never been, objects he had never seen, strange and vivid pictures that arose without warning and then faded. These visions troubled him. They seemed involuntary, uncontrolled, and the young Nikola could not always tell in those early years where the real world ended and the interior one began. He also had extraordinary sensitivity. Loud sounds caused him genuine physical pain. The sight of a pearl or a piece of jewellery made him feel ill in a way he could not explain. He had a deep aversion to touching things with rounded surfaces, particularly peaches. The smell of camphor made him feel faint. He was in many ways already living in a slightly different version of the world than the people around him. But there were gifts too. He could calculate long arithmetic problems entirely in his head. He could visualize mechanical objects with startling precision, not just seeing them, but rotating them, examining them from different angles, testing them mentally before building anything at all. He could take apart a mechanism in his imagination, identify what was wrong with it, and redesign it, all without touching a single tool. He began to train his memory with the same deliberate intensity his father brought to everything. He memorized entire books. He taught himself multiple languages. He slept very little, spending his nights reading by firelight long after the rest of the household had gone quiet. He was not a happy child exactly, but he was a fascinated one. The world was full of puzzles, and he could not stop trying to solve them. Part 2. The Making of a Mind. When Nikola was 7, the family moved from Smiljan to the nearby town of Gospic, a larger, more urban place, full of people and noise and the unfamiliar rhythms of town life. The move was difficult for him. He missed the fields and the silence of Smiljan. In the town there were crowds and social expectations and the constant hum of other people's lives pressing in from all sides. But there was also school with real teachers and proper books. Nikola threw himself into learning with an intensity that alarmed some of his teachers and amazed others. Mathematics in particular seemed to speak directly to some deep part of him. He could solve problems in his head faster than his classmates could write them down. His teachers suspected him of cheating, not out of malice, but because what he was doing seemed impossible. He was not cheating. He was simply thinking differently. In his early teenage years, Nikola began what he later described as a battle for control of his own mind. The visions, the involuntary images, the strange flashes of light, they came more frequently, sometimes overwhelming him entirely. He devised exercises to manage them. He would force his mind to dwell on something else, something calm and ordered, until the storm passed. He trained himself deliberately and methodically to direct his own attention. This discipline, this ability to steer his own inner world, would become one of the most powerful tools he ever developed. At 15, he contracted cholera. He was bedridden for 9 months. His father, terrified of losing another son, sat by his bedside and prayed. Nikola, hovering somewhere between consciousness and fever sleep, made his father a bargain. "If I recover," he said, "I want to go to the technical school in Graz, not the seminary, not the church, the engineering school." His father, who had hoped Nikola would follow him into the priesthood, agreed. Nikola recovered, and so began the next chapter. The Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, the Joanneum, was everything Nikola had hoped for. He arrived in 1875, 19 years old, burning with energy and curiosity, finally surrounded by people who spoke the language of mathematics and physics as fluently as he did. He worked with astonishing intensity. In his first year he took 9 exams where only 5 were required. He received the highest possible marks in every one of them. He began each day before dawn and worked until 11 o'clock at night. His professors wrote to his father, describing Nikola as a student of the first order, a talent that appeared perhaps once in a generation. His father, characteristically, wrote back that such praise could give the boy a swelled head, and asked the professors to please moderate their enthusiasm. But in Graz, something happened that would define the next decade of Nikola's life. His physics professor demonstrated a new piece of equipment, a grammar dynamo, a machine that could act as both an electric motor and a generator. The professor showed the class how it worked, how direct current flowed through it, how the mechanism produced electricity of a reliable kind. Nikola watched. He saw something the professor did not seem to notice, a shower of sparks flying from the brushes that made contact with the commutator, the part of the machine that directed the current. These sparks were inefficient. They represented wasted energy, unnecessary friction, a fundamental limitation in the design. He mentioned this to the professor. He suggested, tentatively, that perhaps it was possible to build a motor that did not need brushes at all. A motor driven by alternating current that changed direction rapidly and continuously, rather than the direct current everyone used. The professor dismissed the idea. It was, he explained, the same as suggesting you could build a perpetual motion machine. It was theoretically impossible. The mathematics did not support it. Nikola nodded and went home and thought about it for the next 6 years. Let yourself rest a little deeper now. The room around you is quiet. The night is settled. There is nothing to solve tonight, nothing to figure out, just the story unfolding softly. The years in Graz were also, in some ways, the beginning of Nikola's lifelong struggle with himself. He had always been prone to obsession, to fixing his full attention on a single problem until he had solved it completely, often to the exclusion of eating, sleeping, socializing, or attending to anything else. In Graz, this tendency accelerated. He gambled, not as a hobby, but as a compulsion, spending hours at the card tables, losing everything, winning it back, losing it again. He could not stop once he had started. He recognized the destructiveness of it and hated himself for the recognition and kept going anyway. He became addicted to billiards in much the same way, and to chess. Any game of strategy and calculation could swallow him whole. He stopped sleeping regularly. He stopped eating regularly. He let his studies slip in his 3rd year, overwhelmed by compulsions he could not fully understand. And then, in 1879, his father died. Milutin Tesla, the serious, learned man who had filled the house with books and dreamed of his son's future, was gone. Nikola was 23 years old. He didn't have a degree. He didn't have money. He didn't have a clear path forward. He disappeared for a while, moved to a village in Slovenia, worked a small job, tried to gather himself, and then, quietly, in the still hours of the night, he began to think again about the motor. Part 3. The Vision Budapest, 1882. Nikola Tesla was 25 years old, working a low-level job at a telephone exchange in the Hungarian capital, learning the practical workings of telecommunications and electrical systems from the ground up. He had been ill. He had suffered what he himself described as a nervous breakdown, a period of heightened sensitivity so extreme that he could hear a watch ticking 3 rooms away. The sound of a fly landing on a table felt to him like a blow. He had to wrap his bed in rubber to muffle the vibrations of the building. He slept almost not at all. He recovered slowly with the help of his friend Antal Sigeti, a calm, patient man who walked with Nikola every day, talking quietly, keeping him tethered to the ordinary world. It was on one of these walks, on a February evening in Budapest's city park, that it happened. The sun was going down. Nikola and Antal were walking along the path, watching the sky turn from orange to gold to the deep fading violet of evening. Nikola was reciting Goethe's Faust from memory. He had memorized the entire poem, and he had reached a particular passage about the setting sun when the idea arrived. Not gradually, not as a slow dawning of understanding, all at once. The entire design of the alternating current motor appeared in his mind, fully formed and complete, as though someone had simply switched on a light. He could see every component, every coil, every rotor, every connection. He could see exactly how alternating current that shifted direction many times per second, could create a rotating magnetic field. And he could see how that rotating magnetic field could drive a motor without brushes, without the sparking, without the wasted energy, without any of the limitations that had made the idea seem impossible. He dropped to his knees on the path. He grabbed a stick and began drawing in the dirt, sketching the design, terrified that if he moved too quickly the vision would fade. Antal watched him, confused. "What is happening?" he asked. Nikola looked up. His eyes were wild. "Watch," he said. "Watch me turn it the other way." And he drew, and explained, and the words tumbled out of him faster than he could organize them, because the whole thing was already there, already complete, already working in the theatre of his mind where it had lived, quietly, for 6 years. The motor was real. He could see it. He could test it mentally, rotate it, stress it, adjust it. He knew with absolute certainty that it would work. He just needed to build it. The next few years were the years of patience and frustration. Nikola moved to Paris, working for the Continental Edison Company, one of the enterprises of the famous American inventor Thomas Edison. He was good at his job, excellent in fact, repairing electrical systems across Europe, solving problems that stumped other engineers, working with a speed and competence that impressed everyone around him. But he could not get anyone interested in his alternating current motor. Direct current was the established system, Edison's system, the system that was already powering the lights of New York City and spreading across the world. Alternating current was a theoretical curiosity, an idea without backing or infrastructure or investment. Nikola tried to explain, tried to demonstrate, tried to find someone with the authority and the resources to actually build what he had designed. The company's managers were polite. They listened, they nodded, they changed the subject. He wrote, calculated, refined. He carried the motor with him in his mind wherever he went, tinkering with it in the dark hours of the night. And then, in 1884, a colleague suggested something that changed everything. "Go to America," the colleague said. "Go to Edison himself." Pause here for a moment. Let your thoughts settle. The lamp is low. The night is deep. You're doing so well, just resting here, letting the story carry you. Jury. Part 4. The New World. Nikola Tesla arrived in New York City on the 6th of June, 1884. He was 27 years old. He had 4 cents in his pocket. He had a bundle of his own poems. He had a letter of recommendation to Thomas Edison. And he had the alternating current motor, entire and complete, in his head. The America he arrived in was a place of extraordinary chaotic energy. New York was a city of 500,000 people, crowded and loud and constantly building, bridges and skyscrapers and underground rail lines all going up at once, the whole city humming with the ambition of a nation that believed it could do anything. Edison's lab in Manhattan was exactly what you would expect from the most famous inventor in the world, full of machines and wires and young men working at all hours, the smell of oil and solder and ambition hanging thick in the air. Thomas Edison was 43 years old. He was already a legend. He had invented the phonograph, improved the telephone, developed the first practical incandescent light bulb. He was known as the Wizard of Menlo Park. He was also famously direct, occasionally brutal in his assessments, and deeply committed to the direct current electrical systems he had spent a decade building. The letter Nikola carried to Edison was from Charles Batchelor, one of Edison's most trusted associates, who had known Tesla in Europe. The letter reportedly read, "I know two great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." Edison read the letter. He looked at Tesla. He asked him what he could do. Tesla explained the alternating current motor. Edison was not interested, but he could see that the young man in front of him was exceptional, and he had work that needed doing. Edison offered Nikola a job, specifically the task of redesigning and improving the direct current dynamos that powered his electrical systems. The machines were inefficient, prone to failure, constantly in need of repair. Edison promised that if Tesla could solve the problem properly, there would be a bonus of $50,000. $50,000 in 1884. A fortune beyond imagining. Tesla went to work. He barely slept. He was already accustomed to that. He worked from 10:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock the following morning, nearly 19 hours a day, day after day. He redesigned 24 different kinds of dynamo. He solved problems that had been frustrating Edison's engineers for years. He did everything that had been asked of him, and more. When he was finished, he went to Edison and asked about the $50,000. Edison laughed. "Tesla," he said, "you don't understand our American humor. There was no bonus. There had never been a bonus. It was a joke, or something like a joke. Edison offered him a $10 raise instead. Tesla quit. He left Edison's company and found himself once again with nothing. No money, no laboratory, no allies. The winter of 1885 was one of the lowest points of his life. He dug ditches to survive, working as a day labourer in the streets of New York, unable to find anyone who would invest in his ideas, unable to get anyone to take him seriously. He was 28 years old, one of the most gifted electrical engineers in the world, digging holes in frozen ground. But the motor was still there, in his head, patient and perfect and waiting. Part 5. The War of Currents. In 1887, everything changed. Two businessmen, Alfred Brown and Charles Peck, agreed to back Tesla. They gave him a laboratory on Liberty Street in Manhattan. They gave him money for equipment, for materials, for assistants, and Nikola Tesla finally built his motor. It worked exactly as he had designed it 6 years earlier on a winter evening in a Budapest park. The rotating magnetic field, the brushless design, the alternating current flowing through the coils in the precise sequence he had envisioned. The machine hummed to life and ran smoothly and silently, and without the shower of sparks that had always troubled him about Edison's system. He filed 7 patents in a single day, 7 fundamental patents covering the principles of alternating current generation, transmission, and use. They were, as subsequent history would prove, among the most valuable patents ever filed. Word reached George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was Edison's great rival, a wealthy industrialist who had built his fortune on railway air brakes and was now looking to expand into electrical power. He understood immediately what Tesla's patents meant. He understood that alternating current was not just a different way of doing things. It was a better way. Fundamentally, demonstrably, provably better. Direct current was strong but limited. It could only travel short distances before the voltage dropped too low to be useful. To power a city with direct current, you needed a generating station every mile or so. It was expensive, inflexible, and could never serve the countryside or reach across any significant distance at all. Alternating current was different. Its voltage could be transformed, stepped up high for long-distance transmission, then stepped back down for safe use in homes and businesses. With Tesla's system, a single generating station could power a city, a region, an entire stretch of countryside. It could travel hundreds of miles down a wire and arrive intact. Westinghouse paid Tesla $1 million for his patents and offered him royalties on every horsepower of power generated using his system. It was the largest payday of Tesla's life, and it was the beginning of what became known in the newspapers and the public imagination as the War of Currents. Edison did not accept the challenge quietly. He had invested his name, his fortune, his reputation, and his considerable ego in direct current. Alternating current, if it succeeded, would render his entire infrastructure obsolete. He fought back with everything he had. He hired a man named Harold P. Brown, who began a public campaign to prove that alternating current was deadly. Brown organized public demonstrations in which large animals, dogs, calves, horses, were electrocuted using alternating current in front of audiences to demonstrate how dangerous it was. Edison lobbied against alternating current at every opportunity. He wrote letters, gave interviews, warned of catastrophe. He suggested that if New York State was going to adopt electrocutions as means of capital punishment, it should use alternating current so that the word Westinghoused might enter the language as a synonym for death. He was not above using deception, manipulation, and the full force of his celebrity to win. Tesla, for his part, responded differently. He did not fight dirty. He demonstrated. He appeared on stage at public lectures across the East Coast, conducting electricity through his own body, lighting bulbs by touch, creating arcs of crackling light between his fingertips, demonstrating that with the proper control and understanding, alternating current was not the monster Edison described, but a force that could be harnessed safely and used to transform the world. The audiences were mesmerized. He was tall, gaunt, impeccably dressed, with large dark eyes and a quality of focused intensity that people found both magnetic and slightly unnerving. He moved through the crackling electricity as though it were no different from sunlight, smiling calmly while sparks danced around him. He was not performing bravado. He was demonstrating physics, and the physics won. Let your body grow heavier now, the breath moving in and out of you, slow and steady. The story is here with you, quiet as candlelight. In 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition opened in Chicago. 27 million people would attend it over the course of 6 months, roughly half the population of the United States. It was the largest public gathering the country had ever seen, a celebration of American innovation and progress. The organizers needed to light it. Both Edison and Westinghouse submitted bids. Edison's bid, based on direct current, was nearly $1 million. Westinghouse Using Tesla's alternating current system, bid half that. Westinghouse won. On the night of May the 1st, 1893, President Grover Cleveland pressed a button, and 100,000 incandescent lights came on simultaneously across the fairgrounds. The White City, as people called it for the white-painted buildings that gleamed in the electric light, erupted in a radiance that had never been seen before. People wept. They had never seen anything like it. Electricity, to most of them, was still something half magical, something that lived in lightning and in the laboratories of scientists. And here it was, tamed and ordered and pouring out of 100,000 glass bulbs at once, turning the Chicago night into something like noon. Tesla himself stood among the crowd that evening. He watched the lights come on. He watched the faces of the people around him, the wonder and the disbelief and the pure, uncomplicated joy. He had imagined this, exactly this, for years. It was not the end of the War of Currents, but it was essentially the moment the war was decided. The following year, the commission to build the generators at Niagara Falls went to Westinghouse. The Niagara Falls Power Company, using Tesla's alternating current system, began transmitting electrical power over 26 miles to the city of Buffalo, New York. It was the first major long-distance transmission of electrical power in history. It proved beyond any remaining doubt that the future belonged to alternating current. Edison's system was not immediately abandoned. It took decades for direct current to disappear entirely from the electrical landscape, but the direction of travel was clear. Tesla had won. Part 6. The Dreamer Grows Stranger. Victory for Nikola Tesla did not bring peace. In some ways it made things harder. The war was over, but the dreaming continued. And as the 1890s progressed, what Tesla dreamed became larger, stranger, and harder for the world around him to follow. He had always been interested in more than motors and generators. The electromagnetic field, he believed, was something vast and largely unexplored. Light and electricity and magnetism were, he suspected, all expressions of the same underlying force, a force that filled all of space, that could carry energy not just down a wire but through the very air itself. He began to experiment with high-frequency currents. He built devices called Tesla coils, transformers that produced enormous voltages at very high frequencies, generating the kind of crackling, dramatic electrical displays that had made his public lectures so unforgettable. But the Tesla coil was more than theatre. It was a tool for exploring a new frontier. He became convinced that it was possible to transmit electrical power wirelessly. Not just a small signal, not just the dots and dashes of telegraphy, but actual power. Usable, large-scale power, transmitted through the earth and through the air, available anywhere on the planet to anyone who wanted it. He imagined a world without wires. He also became increasingly eccentric in his habits. He had always been particular. Now he grew more so. He refused to touch round objects. He counted his steps obsessively. He refused to shake hands, and when he could not avoid it, he washed afterward, immediately with something close to desperation. He developed a loathing of pearls so intense that he once sent his secretary home to change because she'd arrived wearing a pearl necklace. He ate alone at the same table at Delmonico's restaurant every night. He calculated the cubic content of every portion of food before eating it. He could not eat soup unless it was served with exactly 18 napkins stacked beside the bowl. He was fond of pigeons. He began feeding them regularly in Bryant Park, a habit he maintained for the rest of his life. He had favourites among the pigeons, individuals he recognised and looked for. birds he worried about when they did not appear. He did not sleep much. He claimed he never slept more than 2 hours, though friends suspected he occasionally slept more than he admitted. He worked at night, almost always, finding the quiet darkness more conducive to thinking than the noise and interruption of the day. He remained unmarried. He said that a scientist could not afford emotional entanglements, that love required a kind of divided attention that was incompatible with the total focus his work demanded. He spoke of this with apparent calm, as though it was simply a practical decision rather than a sacrifice. Whether he believed that entirely, we do not know. Softer now. The night has deepened around you. Just breathe. Just rest. In 1895, Tesla's laboratory on South Fifth Avenue caught fire and burned to the ground. Years of work, notebooks, equipment, experimental results, partially built devices, all of it gone in a single night. He stood on the street in his shirt sleeves and watched it burn, unable to speak. He did not weep publicly. He rarely showed distress publicly. But those who knew him well said that something shifted in him after the fire. A new intensity, perhaps. A new urgency. As though the loss of all that work had reminded him, sharply, of how much time there was to lose. He rebuilt. He always rebuilt. But the financial footing was increasingly uncertain. The royalty arrangement with Westinghouse, which should have made Tesla wealthy for life, was dissolved. The details of exactly what happened vary depending on who you ask, but the result was this. Tesla tore up his royalty contract, surrendering his rights to the royalties that would have made him one of the richest men in the world. He did it, reportedly, because Westinghouse needed the relief, and Tesla felt he owed Westinghouse a debt of loyalty. It was an act of remarkable generosity, or remarkable naivety, or both, and it meant that as the world grew rich on the technology he had created, Tesla himself remained perpetually short of money. He did not seem to think about this in the way most people would. Money to Tesla was fuel, something you needed enough of to keep the work going, and not something worth thinking about beyond that. If he had enough to build what he wanted to build, that was sufficient. He rarely had enough. Part 7. Colorado Springs. In 1899, Tesla made a decision that would define, for many people, his legacy as much as any motor or generator ever had. He went to Colorado Springs. The location had been carefully chosen. High altitude, clear air, low humidity, and, crucially, the capacity to draw more power from the local electrical company than Tesla could get anywhere in New York. He built a laboratory there, a wooden building with a tower rising from its roof topped with a large copper sphere. Inside he installed the largest Tesla coil ever constructed, and he began to experiment. What he was trying to do in Colorado Springs was prove the principle of wireless power transmission. He believed the Earth itself was a conductor, that a sufficiently powerful electrical signal, broadcast at the right frequency, could travel through the planet and emerge anywhere on its surface. He wanted to show that the entire globe could become, in effect, a single enormous electrical circuit. The results of his experiments at Colorado Springs remain to this day somewhat controversial and somewhat mysterious. Tesla claimed extraordinary things, that he had detected signals from other planets, that he had transmitted power wirelessly across large distances, that he had caused the Earth to resonate at a specific electrical frequency. What is certain is that his experiments were spectacular. On one occasion, he generated so much electricity that he caused artificial lightning bolts to shoot from the copper sphere at the top of his tower, bolts that were, by his own measurement, more than 100 feet long. The thunder was heard 15 miles away. The electrical arcs were visible for miles in the Colorado night. The discharge burned out the generator at the Colorado Springs Electrical Company and plunged the entire town into darkness. Tesla paid for the repairs and kept experimenting. He worked through the night, every night, filling notebooks with calculations and observations, conducting tests by lightning light, sleeping only when he absolutely could not stay awake any longer. He wrote that he felt in those months closer than he had ever been to something fundamental, some deep principle of nature that was just on the edge of his understanding, just a little further down the road he was travelling. Whether he reached it or not, we cannot say with certainty. But something about those months in Colorado convinced him that what he was attempting was not only possible, but necessary. He returned to New York with plans. Thus ist, Part 8, Wardenclyffe. The plan was called Wardenclyffe. Tesla envisioned a tower, a grand cylindrical tower on Long Island, rising 187 feet into the air and sinking an equivalent distance into the earth, that would transmit electrical power wirelessly to any point on the globe. Not just power, also messages, images, information. A system of worldwide communication and power distribution linked through the electromagnetic field that filled the space between the earth and the sky. It was, in many ways, an early vision of what we now call the Internet, a global network connecting everyone, transmitting information instantaneously, making knowledge and communication available to all, regardless of wealth or geography. It was also, in the financial climate of 1900, extremely expensive. Tesla found a backer, J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in America. Morgan agreed to invest $150,000 in the project in exchange for 51% of the patents. Tesla went to work. The tower rose. The laboratory was built. The excavation went down into the earth. Workers poured the concrete and drove the copper rods deep into the ground. It was magnificent. It was exactly what Tesla had envisioned. And then the money ran out. Morgan, watching the project's costs mount and its timeline slip, grew increasingly skeptical. And then, in 1901, something happened that made Morgan's skepticism permanent. Guglielmo Marconi successfully transmitted a radio signal across the Atlantic Ocean. Marconi's achievement was historic and widely celebrated. It was also built substantially on patents that Tesla had filed years earlier, a legal matter that would be disputed for decades. But the public impact was immediate and decisive. If wireless communication was already possible at low cost, with existing technology, why invest millions in Tesla's far more ambitious and expensive scheme? Morgan pulled his funding. He was not cruel about it. There was correspondence, there were conversations, there were attempts by Tesla to explain and persuade. Morgan was not hostile. He simply no longer saw a path to profit, and without a path to profit he was not interested. Tesla spent years trying to find other investors. He mortgaged the Wardenclyffe property. He sold off equipment. He wrote letters to everyone he could think of, trying to explain what he was trying to build, trying to make people understand that this was not just one man's project, but something that could change the condition of human life on Earth. Nobody came. In 1917, the Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished, sold for scrap metal to pay Tesla's debts. He never really recovered from that. Allow yourself to sink now, a little deeper. The story is still here. You don't have to do anything with it. Just let it wash over you, like the sound of rain against a window. Part 9. The Long Solitude. The years after Wardenclyffe were the years of genius in retreat. Tesla was still working. He never stopped working. He filed patents on a bladeless turbine, a device with no moving blades, using the properties of fluid dynamics to convert flowing liquid or gas into rotational energy that engineers are still exploring and improving today. He worked on early concepts for radar, developing ideas about using electromagnetic waves to detect objects at a distance that would not be fully realized until World War II. He worked on vertical takeoff aircraft. He worked on a system for wireless transmission of photographic images. But he was becoming, to the world around him, increasingly marginal. The great battles had been won, by him largely, and the electrical age he had helped create was now managed by large corporations and their engineers, men who were more interested in optimizing what existed than in dreaming up what was next. Tesla had always been a dreamer. The optimizers had little use for dreamers. He lived in a succession of hotel rooms. He had always preferred hotels to having his own home. He travelled light, he needed flexibility, and hotels provided the kind of anonymous, impersonal order that suited someone who could not tolerate too much domestic chaos. He had rooms at the Waldorf Astoria for a time, then the Hotel New Yorker. He ate his dinners alone, at the same table, with his measured portions and his 18 napkins. He fed his pigeons in Bryant Park and Madison Square Garden, and in the street outside whatever window looked out on a ledge where birds might land. He had always loved pigeons. In his later years the attachment grew deeper. He nursed injured pigeons back to health in his hotel room. He recognized individual birds from season to season. He spent money he did not have on food for them, on veterinary care, on anything they needed. There was one pigeon, a white female, that Tesla spoke of with particular tenderness. "I loved that pigeon," he said in one of his later interviews. "I loved her as a man loves a woman, and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life. She died before he did." He said that when she was gone, something in him went out. A light that had been burning for a long time finally extinguished. He gave his last major public statement on his birthday in 1931, his 75th year, marking the occasion, as he often did, with a press conference. Journalists came to his hotel room, and he spoke to them about his current work and about the future. He said he was working on a device that could transmit power wirelessly over any distance. He said he'd been working on it for years. He said it was nearly ready. He said the human race was on the edge of a transformation, a new understanding of the relationship between mind and matter, a new era of peace and plenty and universal knowledge. He said all of this with perfect calm, sitting in a hotel room with very little furniture and a window that looked out on Manhattan, and the journalists wrote it down and the editors cut most of it, and the world went on about its business. He continued working. He continued filing patents. He continued filling notebooks with calculations in the tiny, precise handwriting he had kept throughout his life. He continued feeding his pigeons. He turned 80. He turned 81. He turned 86. Part 10. The Last Night. On the 7th of January 1943, a maid at the Hotel New Yorker noticed that the Do Not Disturb sign had been on Nikola Tesla's door for an unusually long time. She entered the room. He was in his bed, the covers pulled up, very still. He had died sometime during the night, alone, as he had spent so many of his nights. He was 86 years old. They found, in his room, some personal effects, a few items of clothing, a collection of notebooks, and photographs of his pigeons. He died in debt. The hotel bill had not been paid in some years. His possessions were modest. His estate was valued at next to nothing. Within hours of his death, agents from the United States government arrived and seized his papers and notebooks. The government was, by then, deep in the Second World War, and Tesla had spent his final years claiming to have invented a kind of particle beam weapon, something he called, in the newspapers, a death ray. Whether such a thing existed, and in what form, was a matter of immediate military interest. The papers were examined, the notes were catalogued. Eventually they were returned to Tesla's family in Yugoslavia. Whether the death ray was real, whether he had actually built what he claimed to build, is a question that has never been fully answered. But then, many questions about Nikola Tesla have never been fully answered. That is perhaps part of what makes him so endlessly fascinating. Das epilogue, the inheritance. Here is what Nikola Tesla left the world. He left us the alternating current electrical system that powers nearly every home and building and factory on Earth. He left us the rotating magnetic field, the induction motor, the transformer. He left us the Tesla coil. He left us the foundational patents for radio. Patents that a long legal battle eventually recognized as his 2 months after his death, though Marconi had received the credit and the Nobel Prize while Tesla lived. He left us ideas, wireless power, a global communication network, resonant frequency, radar, the concept of robotics, things that were, in his time, too far ahead of the world's ability to understand them, but that the world eventually caught up to. He left us a way of thinking about electricity, not as something you run through a wire from one place to another, but as something that fills space, that can be shaped and directed and made to do the work you need it to do at a distance, invisibly, without contact. Every time you connect to a wireless network, you are touching something Tesla imagined. Every time you charge a device without plugging it in, you are touching something Tesla imagined. Every time you benefit from electrical power transmitted over long distances, which is to say, every time you turn on a light, you are touching something Tesla built. He did not die rich. He did not die famous, exactly. He died in a kind of obscurity that was the opposite of the celebrity he had briefly enjoyed at the height of the War of Currents. He was not given a state funeral, or a national day of mourning, or any of the formal acknowledgments that his contributions arguably deserved. But the world he built remains. It hums around you right now, in the walls of the room where you're resting. It travels through the air above the city outside your window. It is present in every light, every screen, every quietly charging device. It is in some real sense everywhere. And now the story is done. The lights of the city are dimmer now, or perhaps your eyes are simply growing heavier. Nikola Tesla, born in a thunderstorm, raised in the mountains, come to a new world with 4 cents and an idea, left something behind that will last as long as civilization itself. He did not do it for money. He did not do it for fame. He did not do it exactly for love, though perhaps the closest he ever came to love was in his work, in the motor that rotated in his mind for 6 years before he built it, in the pigeons he fed and named and grieved. He did it because he could not stop, because the questions were there, and he was the person who could answer them, and to stop would have been impossible. In that sense, in the most important sense, he had exactly the life he was made for. And that is not such a sad thing. Close your eyes now. Let your breathing slow. The storm that brought Tesla into the world has long since passed. The mountains of Serbia are quiet tonight. The Hotel New Yorker still stands on 34th Street, and on the 33rd floor, room 3327 is just a room, with a window and a bed and a view of the city lights. All those lights, all that electricity moving silently through the dark, all of it, in some way, his. Sleep well tonight. The quiet Pantheon remains open, and tomorrow the great minds of the past will be here again, waiting to be remembered.